Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is Mary Grace Gardner of the Young Professionista, and I help students with finding their passions and writing compelling college application essays so that they can apply to the college of their dreams with confidence. And today I have a special guest with us today. I have Erin Taylor. And today we'll be talking about communication between parent and student during this very difficult time when students are preparing for college and stress might be at an all-time high. What we'll be talking about today are some effective strategies to improve communication. So Erin is a PCI Certified Parent Coach and motivational speaker, host of the Powerful Parenting for Today Kids podcast, author, and a mother of four. Erin founded Revolutionizing Life, a company and online school dedicated to supporting therapists, coaches, and other professionals trying to make a difference in the world, as well as parents and children. Erin was able to take the tragedy of the death of her infant daughter and turn it around, using her hard-earned wisdom to help people from all walks of life step into their power and live their best lives. Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mary Grace. It is a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. So
Me
let's
too.
start off with you telling us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Well, I have known since I was 11 years old that I wanted to help families. I was fortunate to be raised by wonderful parents who loved me unconditionally and conveyed that love to me. And as I was growing up, I looked around and I realized that not everyone around me in my school and my classes and stuff, they didn't seem to be having the same experience as I was growing up. So that's kind of when I first started to realize that my my childhood wasn't necessarily the norm for everyone. And when I was 11, I decided that I really wanted to dedicate my life to helping families so that children could have a healthy, happy upbringing the way I did. And so I went to college. I got my bachelor's and my master's degree in psychology. I worked for about 20 years as a therapist before going back to school to get certified as a parent coach. And now I coach families, parents and children alike, to help them understand each other more, communicate better, and have healthier, deeper, more fulfilling relationships with each other.
It's such important work. And especially as we're thinking about kind of the college prep time, can be such a difficult time between parent and child. So I'm so thankful that you decided to go into this line of work. For those of you who are watching this live on Facebook, feel free to let us know questions that you've got for Erin, and I'll make sure to answer or to make sure to give Erin a chance to answer those questions during our live stream. And if you're watching this on the replay, let us know in the comments still if you've got any questions. Erin and I will come back to make sure that we address those questions as well. So Erin, thank you so much for sharing with us your background. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you help families? What does that look like? And can you tell us a little bit more about your practice?
Sure. So I think it's when I think about the parent-child relationship, if you think of different animal species, many of them come into the world, they're born into the world knowing how to walk or um, kind of basically care for themselves, how to find food. Or if they are not, it's not very long before they quickly learn how to do that and they can be fully independent. And humans, of course, are not like that. We come into the world, we can't really do anything. We need to be changed, we need to be fed, we need to be kept warm. We don't know how to walk or talk or feed ourselves. It takes a long time for us as humans to become more and more independent. And I think that that need that parents have, a very real need from birth to basically do everything for our children, is sometimes hard for some parents to transition out of. And I encourage parents to look at their job as if they are raising an adult rather than raising a child. I mean, our goal really should be to raise our children so that they can become functioning, independent, contributing members of society. And if we spend the first 18, 16, 17, 18 years treating them similarly to the way we did when they were infants, we're not really preparing them for that transition from being home with us through the primary years, K through 12, and then suddenly they're going to go off to college where they're not going to have us there every minute of every day, watching over them, guiding them, telling them, making decisions for them. And we really do a disservice to our kids if we don't start if we don't keep the spirit in our mind of trying to give them as much independence as they're developmentally ready for every step along the way from birth, as soon as our kids can put their shoes on, we need to remember to let them put their shoes on rather than doing it for them because it's just how we've always done it. And we just never realized to let them do it. And so I think the best service we can do to our kids as they grow older is to help that transition from high school to college to be less abrupt, less dramatic, less aggressive. And the way we do that is way back when they're younger by giving them increasing levels of independence that they're ready for. And if your child is 14, 15, 16 now, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, it's too late. I've screwed this whole thing up. I haven't given them enough independence. It's never too late. You can you can start today by really looking at your child and the things they do or need to do and really asking yourself if they can do more things independently and what can you start handing over to them and letting them do it. And then also kind of shifting from the role of when they're young, needing to do so much for them and you do need to kind of plan your child's schedule when they're 3 years old or 5 years old or 7 years old. But shifting from like the master coordinator of everything when they're young to being more of a consultant as they grow through their teenage years. I think that's the best thing we can do as parents.
I think that's such an important point. So I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old now. And as you were talking about kind of earlier on that spectrum where you are doing so much for the child, and there isn't necessarily a guidebook, right, on exactly when does that transition happen and when should you be having these conversations. But like you're mentioning, age appropriate and kind of testing out how much your child can actually take on is so important to do even early on, not necessarily just waiting right until the very end. And as you were talking, something that sparked for me is as I'm working with students, typically between the grades 9th and 12th grade in my college prep practice. Oftentimes, as students are meeting with me, there are some of the things where you would think as an adult are quote unquote basic that oftentimes students don't even realize to do or know or think they should be doing, right? Where it could be something very simple like how to ask for help in class, right? Or how to, if they're doing an internship or whatever it might be, how to ask good questions of your internship boss, or how to try a project and be okay with failing. And these sorts of things are not necessarily self-generated by these students. They need to have a space where they are getting feedback on, is it okay for them to try and fail? Is it okay for them to kind of struggle through whatever it is they may be struggling through? And sometimes when I meet with my students, some of the basics like how to have an effective calendar, right? How do you actually use a scheduling calendar for yourself as a student? Oftentimes we think, oh, of course they'll know how to do that. And I find when I ask questions like to my students, what is your plan for the week? Or when are you going to be studying? At the early stages, they don't know. Like they will sometimes not know how to actually use a physical planner or a digital planner and think, I have all that checklist in my head, I'll sort it all out. But some of those things where that's the beginnings of independence, right? Is how to navigate a schedule of their own, how to ask for help. These are things that oftentimes I'm seeing students don't know right away and do need some of that guidance to better understand.
That is so true. I currently have a family that I'm working with, and the daughter is a sixth grader. And we're working on helping her to do some growing independence things like asking a waitress for a bottle of ketchup instead of asking her parents to ask the waitress. We're
Mhm.
trying to nudge her into growing levels of independence. So it's really, I think it's easy for us to overlook or have in our blind spot as parents the things our kids need to do. There's so much focus, as you know, on grades and achievement and extracurricular activities and sports and part-time jobs and beef up your resume, your college resume and make it look amazing and this and that and the other. But are we remembering to help them know how to order food and write a check and manage money and manage their time and do their laundry? Are we remembering to do these basic things that we do that it's so easy to take for granted that we just do them, but we forget sometimes that we have to teach our kids how to do them also so that they can be prepared as they go out into the world.
Yeah, it becomes a very jarring transition then from high school into college without some of those basics because students might be so used to it. I remember when I was transitioning into college, I had classmates who were thinking, oh, the toilet paper doesn't replenish all by itself, right? Or, oh,
Right.
oh, the snacks are gone, right? So things like that, where it can be such it's a blessing, right, to be able to be in households where that is happening. And sometimes students just struggle with some of that of, waking up on time and heading over to their college class. There isn't a parent waking them up to push them to school, or making sure they get a good enough amount of sleep so that they can be alert and their best state for learning when they're in college. Things like that become a really hard transition for some of those students who don't get that. And so in high school, those are some of the things that I focus on, even asking students questions like, how many hours of sleep do you need to be the best you? And sometimes they've never even thought about it, right? And they realize, actually, I need 8 to 10. And then you ask them, how many hours of sleep did you get last night? And they say 5 to 6. Some of those basics of, well, let me take a look at what I need as a student to do well, and how do I self-manage some of that stuff when they might be just on kind of autopilot, not really thinking how can they take more independence for themselves. So I really love that focus that you've got. And so one thing that I wanted to make sure that we talked more about too is this kind of high school time frame. So during the high school years, and especially when it comes to getting ready for college, this can introduce all sorts of new dynamics between parents and students. I see it time and time again with the families that I work with. So for some families, communication about their teen's future, their hopes, their dreams, the future job, future college, future life is easy. They can talk about it freely. Students are willing to share what they think. It's a peaceful conversation. So that's for some families. But what I would say for many families I have seen and heard about actually during this time, it's actually particularly tough. There's just so much change happening. What are some of the challenges that you are seeing regarding communication during this really important time frame?
Well, I think you bring up some really, really good points there. Um, it's funny. I have two comments that jumped into my mind when when my now college son was going through high school. I was very aware that we needed to shift out of me making sure he woke up on time to him making sure he woke up on time. I That's one of the things for whatever reason I really kept in my mind thinking, oh, well, figure out somebody's got to make sure he gets up on time at college, so it better be him, not me. And we actually struggled through that. I feel like it took him longer to take over that responsibility than I was hoping it would have. And it did cause me a little bit of worry and stress at times when he was in 10th grade and I was still having to go in his room and say, hey, you should have been up 5 minutes ago for school. But alas, we talked about it endlessly sometimes. And he started getting himself up on time for school as a senior pretty regularly without me even having to do anything, which I was so grateful for. And he did fine his freshman year of college. Now he's got a job in the summer that sometimes he has to leave at 5:45 in the morning. And he does it and he gets there on time. And so, that's one of the things that we have to think about. How are they managing? Are they able to manage their time? Do they need help from us to figure out strategies to manage their time, to get themselves up early, things like that? And then just yesterday, my younger kids, 14 and 16, and I were talking in the car about the college admissions scandal that happened. What was that, 2 years ago? Um, and they were kind of talking about, my younger son hadn't heard of it about it, and so he was asking me what scandal, what's happening and why. And I was explaining to him how some of them cheated to get better scores, for their kids to get better scores on the SAT with having someone stand in for them to take the test or pretend to be them, and then others faked being athletes when they weren't, and different things like that. And my daughter said, why would they, first of all, my son said, why would they do that? Why would anybody do that? And then my daughter said, don't didn't these parents understand that if they do that, they're telling their kid they have no confidence in their abilities? Like, they don't believe they can do it on their own, so they need to cheat and lie and pay extra money for them to get what, into some school or something? I don't understand. And I said, there are certain pockets of people and groups of people where there's such a focus on what school your child goes to, what their major is, what kind of high paying job or fancy title they're going to get out of school, coming out of school. And so there are kind of, some people live and grow up in this fishbowl where the focus is so external. How does everything look to the outside world? And it's so tragic, I think, when families are in that fishbowl, because it's just detrimental to the kids, to the relationships that the parents and children have. And really, I think the focus, like the the umbrella spirit for us as parents should really be on encouraging and supporting our kids to really find out, which I know you do anyway with your clients, to really find out what they're good at and what they like to do, and then encourage them to do that. Because if all kids could grow into adulthood figuring out what they love and what they're good at, and then finding opportunities to do that very thing or those very things, the world would be such a different place if people were in careers that they loved, that brought them fulfillment and joy. I mean, that's what we should be focusing on as parents, not worrying about, did you get an A in that class, and what'd you get on that test, and how's your SAT score? I mean, that stuff is important, but kind of like important on the surface level. The bigger issue is, what do you want to do? What lights you up? What brings you joy? What makes you feel alive when you do it? That's where our focus should be for them.
This is exactly why I wanted to make sure Erin and I had a chance to talk together, because we have such alignment on this perspective. I do agree that there is just such this pressure of perfectionism of these external metrics, right? And I completely agree with you on the bigger question is helping students to figure out what kind of difference do they want to make in the world? What kind of problems do they like to solve? What makes them feel good and energized by engaging in certain pieces of work or being part of certain communities? Figuring those things out can be much more exciting, fulfilling, and can drive the student then to pursue college if that's the right fit, or pursue something else if college isn't the right fit for them, right? But being able to answer those types of questions are so important. And then I also agree with you that sometimes that overhelp can really put a student at a disadvantage when they do get into college or graduate school or beyond trying to get a job. I unfortunately encountered a family who hired people who did unethical things and did things for their child to get into a certain college. They turned to me for some help regarding that student's transition into a different college. And it was really clear to me right away that the student wasn't the person who applied to college, that the student didn't do a lot of the things that were on the list. From an ethical standpoint, I had to step away from the engagement because it was clear that this student didn't put in the work, and therefore the parents' expectation on what they wanted to do and what she wanted to be were completely misaligned. And it's just unfortunate because for that particular student, that particular child, it sets them back because they weren't engaged in the process. Didn't they didn't know when they did hit college kind of how they got there, and now it resulted in all sorts of problems for them. And so I agree with you that part of that learning journey is kind of experiencing that struggle and being able to learn more about yourself outside of academics to really get to that higher level, I think, of fulfillment and joy and being able to understand purpose and passion.
Yeah, that's so true. I was just thinking about my daughter who is a rising junior, and for the past, well, in ninth grade, we did it a little bit and certainly more in 10th grade. But when she needed to reach out to her guidance counselor, she was the one who had to send the email. When she needed to ask the teacher a question, she needed to handle that. And, there was a lot of remote
Mhm.
learning going on through the pandemic. So there was a lot of electronic communication going back and forth. And she was not comfortable with that early on. And she would kind of resist a little bit and say to me, Mom, I don't know how to send an email. I don't know how to word it. I don't know what to say. And I said, you know what? What you're doing is adulting. That's what you're practicing. And it's my job as your parent to help you to practice adulting now when you're in high school and you still live at home, so that I can help you and guide you, so that your dad and I can help you and guide you. And when you make mistakes, help you fix them, or you draft the email and I'll look it over and give you my suggestions if I think you missed anything or it's not clear. That way you can practice in the safety and the structure of our house and our home, so that you grow more clear about these things, more confident about these things. And then when you go to college, where I'm not going to be there to write the email for you, you feel like, oh, I got this. I've been practicing this for a couple years. I know how to do this. So whenever she has to do something like that, that she kind of is like, oh, I don't want to do it, I just say, remember, you're practicing adulting. So it's kind of like a cute little thing that we have back and forth, where I just kind of gently give it back to her. No, this you're old enough now that this is not my responsibility. I will certainly help you if you need help, but this one's on you.
I love that you give that safe space for her to practice, right? And the notion of practice means that you're not going to get it perfect off the
No.
first time, and that's okay. And I think sometimes what I see, sometimes the students fear not being perfect at it at the first
Yes.
time. And just that notion of it's okay to not be perfect at something the first time. Actually, the way you get better is being really horrible at it a
Practice.
couple of times and then learning from the mistakes and then getting better at it. So I think being able to build that muscle early is so important. This growth mindset, right? Of being able to do that. I noticed also in my corporate career and the work that I had been doing with teaching growth mindset and transformation to different leaders and executives, and it's tough even for those who are seasoned leaders to learn how to do that, how to have this growth mindset. And I think it's just so powerful when children get to practice it at an early age. It's fascinating because it's something they're born with, right? At the very beginnings, when they are learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to do anything. It's all about growth mindset. It's all about being okay to fail. It's when they're kids, when they're little, and I see this with my babies now, they walk up to other kids and start talking to them. And if it turns out to be a friendship, great. And if not, they move on to the next kid, right? And so there's that resiliency that is kind of built in very early on as children are exploring the world. And then it's just an interesting phenomena as time goes on, that willingness to try and fail and practice is something that, if we are not careful about it, can easily kind of go away. That natural ability to do it and that comfort, it starts becoming uncomfortable, which is why I just love that you're continuing to give your daughter that environment and space to be okay with practicing adulting. And it's not expected that she's supposed to be perfect at being an adult while being a teen.
Right. And another thing I wanted to touch on that I was thinking about a few minutes ago, I know we're talking a lot about college, but you kind of touched on it a few minutes ago. Maybe college isn't the right path for your child. And I absolutely love our high school where my kids go, but there is a very strong focus on college. And there's a lot of talk about it from teachers and guidance counselors and in newsletters and whatever is coming out from the school. And there are tons of trades that are really good careers that are chronically understaffed. There are tons of apprenticeships that go unfilled each year because there aren't enough kids to fill them. And so I think that part of helping your child to practice adulting and some of these conversations that are beneficial in the high school years is to really help your child to figure out what it is that they like to do. And if they really like to use their hands and they really don't love school all that much, some kids are just not a good match for the type of school that education that we have in this country, but they're really good at putting things together and solving problems mechanically. And so if it looks like your child leans in that way, maybe a trade is even a better fit for them, and they can have a wonderful career doing one of those as well. But it's important to really see your child for who it is they are rather than who it is you wish that they were or who it is that you want to present to your friends. Because let's face the painful reality, your friends may judge your child if they don't go to school or judge you. Well, maybe I would say maybe they really aren't friends if they're judging to that level. But um, I just wanted to touch on how, college isn't necessarily the right thing for every child. And if it's not right for your child, pushing them will only cause a disaster potentially.
I think that openness to different pathways is really important because, and I come from the philosophy of people should pursue work that they are fulfilled by, that they enjoy if they are able to. I know not everyone has that opportunity, right? But if you are in that opportunity to, you can make, and people are oftentimes, I find that parents are oftentimes worried about their children being able to pay the bills and make enough money. And, if they do a little bit more research into the trades, many of them make high 5, 6 figures salaries as well. There are also several people who are successful without a college degree, right? And they open businesses, entrepreneurs, they do other things and can make multi-millions off or billions off of it without even having that college degree. And so I think it comes down to letting children have an opportunity to identify what they are good at, what they want to do, what they want to solve. And not always is it resolved by a college degree. So I think that part is quite important as well in determining passion and purpose and wanting to understand next steps. And so I think it's an important thing. And I know it's maybe a bit blasphemous as a college admissions and career coach to say, well, maybe college isn't for everyone, but I do think it's true. It isn't for everyone. And it's difficult. I know for when I see some parents come to terms with that particular perspective that their child might not be going to college, and it still can be okay. The child can still be successful. The child can still be fulfilled, even without that college degree.
Yes, I have two comments about that. I don't think it's blasphemous at all for you to mention that, because let's imagine that someone came to you with a child who really wasn't a good match for college, but the parents really only saw that as the only option. And they wanted you to help their child get into college. And let's say you did, and they got into college. Well, just because they get in doesn't mean they will succeed, doesn't mean they'll make it. I work with a family where they encouraged, nudged the child into college, and it was an abysmal failure. It was the first fall semester was so stressful on this family because the child wasn't getting the work done. They weren't asking the professors for help. They weren't asking their counselor for help. Nothing. The child was not engaged, not doing the work. The parents were angry because they were paying all this money for tuition, and they were frustrated with their child because he wasn't doing what he needed to do. And then they finally said, if you don't pull your grades up when you come home for winter break, you are not going back. Well, he didn't pull his grades up, and they didn't let him back. But thankfully, they were able to calm themselves down and kind of get a grip on themselves before they discussed this with him when he came back. And they had a much more conscious, supportive, open-minded approach to him. And what he decided during that time, that downtime over that break, was that he wanted to join the military. And so he enlisted, and he just graduated from basic training. And when I see photos of this young man, he is happy. The joy on his face is so palpable. It's unbelievable. He's happy. The parents are so proud of him. They're happy. Everybody, all the stress is gone. They know that he's found the thing that lights him up and excites him. And he's so engaged and so motivated. And I absolutely love this story because it highlights so much of what we're talking about. They encouraged him to find the path that's right for him, and he did, and he's thriving. It's so beautiful.
I think that's just such an important alignment. And the study you were just talking about at the very beginning, your example, for myself personally, when I am encountered by a family where there is this just a misalignment, the parents want the student to be a doctor, they do not want to be a doctor, whatever it might be.
Right.
I don't engage actually with those families because I can see where the child won't have that opportunity to express themselves or to learn about what they want, or and if the parents aren't willing, if they are very much this is how it's going to be, I already know it's going to be a disaster, right, for that particular family, and
Mm-hmm.
they need to be serviced by other resources instead, right? And college prep is probably not my type of college prep is probably not what they're looking for, because of exactly like you mentioned, that what it does cause is just so much stress and so much turmoil and such, I feel like, waste of precious time with your child, right? Having them be or become something they don't want to be or do. And I think it's just such a unfortunate circumstance when that occurs. And when families allow for their children to actually pursue what they are inspired by, I think personally as a parent, there's nothing more that I want than to see my kids healthy and happy. Those are the two, and safe, right? Those are the probably three that I really want for my children. And when I see that happiness factor not being part of what uh, parents are kind of being open-minded to for their child to help them discover what makes them happy versus telling them this will make you happy, I think that just ends up causing so much turmoil. And then you said there was a second thing. Was there a second thing you wanted to add to that, Erin?
I did want to add something about the college process, but of course now it flew out of my mind.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, it'll come back, I'm
It'll
sure.
come back because we'll talk a little bit more about college as well. So you kind of touched on this when you were talking about your daughter and her communication during the pandemic. So the pandemic has introduced also all sorts of changes
Whew.
between just communication overall. And I like to highlight communication in particular between parent and child. So you gave examples with your daughter and yourself. What are some other ways you're seeing that the pandemic is impacting parent-child communications?
I'm seeing so many negative implications, negative effects from the pandemic and the families that I'm working with. I actually had a dad the other day ask me, "What is are are you seeing negative effects from the pandemic from other families, or is it just us?" And I said, "Oh my gosh." And it really occurred to me that he doesn't actually have the gift of the access to families that I do. He felt like they were the only ones. My dog is barking to go out. Um, he felt like they were the only ones who were experiencing this, but it's so not true. So many families have experienced challenges and negative effects from this pandemic. And so my first thing to say to him was, "You are not alone. This is universal." I struggle to think of a family that I know of where they have had no negative effects from the pandemic. So I think that's uh, the first issue that, or the first point that I would make to try to ease parents and families to not feel like they're alone and they must be the only ones dealing with this, because it is absolutely universal. And in terms of communication as a result of the pandemic, I think it is important to communicate to our kids, for us to understand and communicate to our kids. This has been hard on everyone. And what we want to do as a family is, how can we come out of this resilient and stronger and working together as a team? We've all taken our hits and gotten our scrapes and our cuts and our bruises from this pandemic. Now, how can we come together and come out of it better and stronger than we were before? How can we work as a team? I think that's the spirit that I would encourage.
I think it all of it too, just the disruption of everyone's schedules, lives, your day to day. It was inevitable that communication between parent and child would be different as well during this past 18 months. And I think as you're sharing, seeing this as an opportunity, because there will be an end eventually, right, to the pandemic. I'm gonna knock on some wood. And the notion of how can we as a family emerge through this stronger versus kind of being completely victim to the shifts that the pandemic may have had. And then I'm curious too, from your perspective, what are some things you kind of touched upon this through our conversation? What are some things that families can do to improve communication between each other, between parents and the teens during this stressful time as they're going through high school, as they're figuring out college, figuring out futures? What do you think are some concrete things that parents and their teens can do to improve communication?
Well, I think about what I hear from parents of teenagers a lot. Those I work with, those I encounter just in my travels, what have you. And I think it's such a common comment that I hear from parents. "Oh, my teenagers, they're driving me crazy." This is just such a a common complaint I hear. And what I think is oftentimes at the root of it is, teenagers developmentally are looking for greater levels of independence. They're they're looking for exactly what we should be giving them. But like I said initially, sometimes it's hard for us to remember to give them growing levels of independence. So they're pulling and pushing and trying to get that thing that developmentally they're ready for. And so I think it's really important for us to, when we feel like there are power struggles going on between us and our child, or we're just mystified by, like, what the heck? I'm so frustrated. I can't wait till they move on and go off to school or go get a job or something. I'm so frustrated by my teen. And I think it's really important to go back to that concept of, or the question of, have I allowed my child the amount of independence that it's developmentally appropriate for where they are in life right now? And if you're having a bunch of power battles with your teenager, and you ask that question, I bet you're probably going to find that the answer is no. You have not given them developmentally appropriate levels of independence. And that's why they're struggling and battling with you and pushing the limits and boundaries, because they desperately need to flap their wings a little bit. So one of the things that started we started instituting with our older son, who's in college now, in the spirit of this idea of growing levels of independence, we tried from probably middle school, 7th or 8th grade, to say yes as often as we possibly could to the things he wanted to do. And this, I didn't realize it at the time, but this became an amazing blessing and gift in our relationship, because when I was able and willing, even if it was like stretching my willingness a little bit, when I was able to say yes to the things he wanted to do, go when he was younger, go to the mall with his friends without me, that when they're at that age, are you letting them have that independence when they're developmentally ready for it, or are you still insisting that you walk through the mall with them? Things like that. When I constantly tried to say yes as often as I was comfortable saying yes. And then when he would ask to do things that I just was absolutely not going to agree to, then I could say no, but then it gave me so much leverage to say, that I say yes as often as I possibly can. But and so when I say no, I mean no. Like, there is no way I'm comfortable with this. Absolutely not. And so it really miraculously just completely eliminated power struggles. I mean, I went through the last probably 3 to 3.5 years of his high school career, and now even into college, no, like, zero power struggles. Because when I had to say no, he knew it was serious. He knew he was asking for something outrageous, because I said I said yes as often as I could. And that was just this crazy little thing that became such a huge blessing in our relationship.
As you're sharing that, I guess I should have a conversation back with my parents, because as you were saying that, it made me reflect back on my upbringing. And my parents were similar in that they gave me so much opportunity to be independent, right? They gave me so much choice when I was growing up as a teen,
Beautiful.
and they let me kind of self-regulate on some of those things, right? So for those of you who aren't familiar with my background, in high school I was highly active. I was in sports, I was president of several clubs, I graduated valedictorian. But what people probably didn't know is that my parents would have let me, if I wanted to go to the mall, go to the movies, go to a theme park, they would just let me. There was no curfew, but I would always come home at a decent time. I didn't cause much trouble at all growing up, but they gave me so much independence. And I remember I remember growing up, some of my classmates who had super strict parents, and I would see such rebellion happening where the parents weren't aware
Yes.
that it was happening, right? And parents thinking they were one place, but they were not. And I was thinking, wow, in contrast, I would say comparatively by that definition of quote unquote strict, my parents weren't strict, right? But yet we didn't have those rules, and I was allowed to be independent and was respectful of those of creating kind of those boundaries of right and wrong for myself. And obviously they were there to guide me. But I was so looking back, I should give a call to my parents after this conversation, is I realizing that it does make such a difference when you have that trust
Mm.
of being able to kind of sort out kind of right from wrong. You get that guidance, but you do get that opportunity to still kind of figure it out. It's so powerful.
That's a beautiful gift your parents gave you. Thank you for sharing that. That's really wonderful.
At the time, though, I did not realize it.
Sure.
And for folks who might have watched a couple episodes back, I share a story about how my parents in college, I went through quarter life crisis, not knowing what I wanted to be or wanted to do, what I wanted to major in. I called my parents in tears saying, "Tell me what to do." And their answer was, "No, we will not. You have to figure out what you like. You have to figure out what you love. You've got to figure out what impact you want to make. We're here to support you, but we're not going to tell you what to do." And I thought that was the worst advice ever.
Yeah.
And now I look back and realize, actually, that was a blessing. And so I'm so glad, Erin, as you're talking through kind of how you encourage parents to create those type of relationships to improve communication and then ultimately have more independent children. I think that's such a wonderful gift. So, Erin, for families who would like to work with you, want to learn more about you, where should they go?
They can go to my website, and that is just erin-taylor.com, ERIN-TAYLOR.com, and they can schedule a consultation with me or read more about what I do with families there. And then I also have my podcast, which you will be on coming up soon, Powerful Parenting for Today's Kids.
And we'll make sure we'll have all those links in the comments below. Erin, any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our viewers with?
I heard I read a story one time. I don't remember who wrote it or who said it or where I even saw it, but I think it's a really good note to end on. The person said, in talking about raising their kids, they said, I want to raise my kids so that they will want to call me when they're adults and they will actually want to spend time with me and not just do it out of obligation, but that they actually like me as a person. And so I think that's a great spirit to raise our kids in. You know, there's so much there parents and kids go through so many battles and power struggles and disagreements and just everything. But are you are you raising your kids in a way where they will actually want to call you when something good happens to them, when they get a promotion when they're 25 years old? I think that's a good spirit to keep in your minds when you interact with your kids at any age.
I love that. I love that perspective of what kind of relationship are you cultivating? And over time, what might that look like in the future? That's such a helpful perspective. Erin Taylor, thank you so much for joining us today. And so, for those of you who are viewing this, let us know what is your biggest takeaway in the comments below. And if you've got a question for Erin, let us know in the comments and we'll come back and make sure we answer them all. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.